if you're not frightened by what you've heard, you should be. If you looked at Peter's slides and said, "Oh, that's from a science fiction movie," fortunately, we live in the real world where that can't happen. Um, the fantasy is on your end of thinking that it can't happen. I, as a lifetime scholar of democracy, I'm not a legal scholar, I'm a political scientist, but it's been my privilege to work with Rick and Ned. Um, believe there is a very serious chance that we will suffer a breakdown of American democracy around the presidential electoral process in 2024. And if it happens, if we cannot clearly determine who the winner was with some kind of legally recognized legitimacy, even if we still have one party or the other denying the legitimacy, the levels of violence, I think, will exceed what Peter was envisioning. And the damage to the American economy could well be what Peter was envisioning. The existential self-interest of American business in doing what can be done statutorily to construct better guardrails and better clarity around this process is, to me, overwhelming, simply overwhelming. Business often asks itself, what are the risks on the horizon and how can we guard against them? Usually, this risk reduction involves business strategies that are largely, unique to the corporation. But in this case, I think there is something that American business can do and really must do to ensure that some of those extremely rickety and virtually non-existent by now guardrails around our electoral process can be at least somewhat fortified. Fixing, amending the Electoral Count Act and the Failed Election Act, hopefully as well, is not going to solve every problem and vulnerability. But we have a moral and political obligation to ourselves and to our country to do what can be done. And I think that there is, in these coming months, Ned and Rick are closer to the process, so they can comment on it. There's a window of opportunity, and it feels like we're somewhat close. And it would just be tragic. It'd be a tragedy if we lost this moment. And if the worst comes to pass, and we do lose this moment, I think history will damn every one of us who heard the preceding three presentations or things like it that have been written and talked about, and didn't do what we can to bring this about. I'd like to just make one other point, which Ned and Rick can react to if they want. I think our best hope is going to be to construct these guardrails and remove these loaded guns through statutory reform, and then hope as much as possible that the courts, the federal and state courts, will be, the arbiters of any disputes. And I think it should be obvious that we may need to give that judicial process more time than it now has, given the date on which certification of a state's electoral votes under the current, quote, safe harbor provisions needs to occur. I personally hope, I don't know where this stands, Rick and Ned could comment on it, that the reform of the Electoral Count Act will also move the safe harbor date back. I believe it was December 8th in 2020. Is that right, Rick and Ned? And it'll be a similar date probably in 2024. Move it back about 3 weeks or something. It doesn't sound like a huge amount of time, but it might give more time for disputes around state election results to be resolved in the courts so that they don't contaminate the national process. But you do what you can at any moment in time to try and reduce risk. And anything that can be agreed upon in the amending of these acts is going to be much better than nothing at all. And I hope members, reasonable members of Congress of both parties will recognize that.